everyone, and welcome back to The Latest, the official podcast of the Brock Press, where we take you beyond the headlines and do a deep dive into some of the many interesting articles written by our team this week. My name is Noah Nickel, and as always, I'm joined by Holly Morrison. And this week we are joined graciously by one of our news editors, Chad Ellis. How are you both doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, Noah. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Things are good. How about you, Holly?
I'm good. It's cold, but other than that, I am good.
We're making it through.
We are making
to the
it
other
through.
side.
One day
I can notice. Yeah, one day the snow will be gone. But I even like the days I feel like the sun is out longer now. Like we're starting to get into, well, not get into spring, but definitely getting to the end of winter. Knock on wood.
Hopefully there's no other big snowstorm.
Yeah, that was enough for a long time.
It just keeps coming. It's crazy.
We're really had a treat of the last 2 years, and really 2022 is not off to the best start, but that means it can only get better, right?
Hopefully.
Yeah, the snow can only melt. It can only get warmer from here, I hope.
And we also, to expertly transition into our conversation, we also have the lifting of our lockdown restrictions here in Ontario to look forward to, which comes on the 31st. Is the start of that, I believe, or like the 1st, but overnight, whatever. So that's less than a week away. So that's always good. And we're, again, still steadily heading towards that, March date of when things are supposed to be, air quotes, back to normal in Ontario, at least according to the government's deadlines. So let's hope that they are, their crystal ball is correct and things are back to normal. But I'm not holding out lots of hope on that. But we'll get into that in a minute. We have that, so that stuff's good, that things are kind of lifting, becoming more open again. We also have, Bell Let's Talk Day to talk about, and some social media stuff, because that's always fun to talk about, right? So with that, we will get into the first articles. So our first set of articles for this week that we'll be talking about are related to the reopening and the lifting of lockdown restrictions, as I mentioned just a moment ago. Devani and Chad wrote about how Brock and the province of Ontario as a whole are reopening after the latest round of lockdown measures were reimposed earlier this month. We shared our brief thoughts on the campus reopening in this week's feature as well, all of us on staff. And I shared a little take on the lockdown restrictions and some of the back and forth and how, in practice, some of them have turned out to be maybe sillier or, less serious and less meaningful than they might have seemed on paper. So there was a lot of lockdown and COVID focus. Nothing new there. Big shocker. But with that, we will get into talking about all this stuff. So the first thing, and I know we already touched on it with our features, but I think we can get a little more into the weeds a little bit. So what do you guys think about, coming back to campus and things reopening? Is this the right thing to do, the right time for it?
I guess I'll give my take first of all. No, I feel like it's a bit rushed personally, and I don't think it's necessary. I think the flip-flopping, and I mentioned this in my bit of the feature, the flip-flopping is kind of worse for you than just sticking to one thing, because I've had to personally, adapt my own learning style multiple times now in the span of a few months, whether it be going to in-person classes and then now being online for roughly a month and then, now transitioning back to in-person in some format with some of my classes staying online. I feel like it would be better served if, they just stuck to it being online for the next 2 or so months that are left in the semester, rather than now put students in this weird position where you're kind of back and forth now, kind of figuring out which classes are online and which classes stay in person. From a health and safety standpoint, it's not the best thing we could do, and I don't want to get too much into the rules of it, but I just feel like we've had this online system for a while now, and it's worked, and we were doing it for January. I feel like we could have just continued for the rest of the 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It seems pretty crazy to come back, and especially because like they have a bit of a rolling reopening as well. Not everything is back right away. I mean, most stuff is in the next like week or two or so, somewhat like that. But still, not everything is supposed to be back until like the end of February. So then it's like you're literally back for March and like that first week of April. So it just seems, I don't know, that seems kind of crazy to me that they'd even bother at that point, and it's really just puts more stress in terms of like workload and stuff, but literal stress as well on everyone having to make that readjustment. But yeah, seems not like the right move for the winter semester, even though a lot of us are definitely itching to get back. It's like this isn't really the way to do it, I don't think.
Yeah, like obviously like COVID stuff aside, I guess, if you can even put it to the side for a second, just like in terms of like learning and going to class, it feels weird, and it sucks to have to start the semester one way and then finish it a different way. Like the way that I approach like online classes and the way that I like schedule my days when I'm online is different to the way that I do it when I'm in person. Like I have to like factor travel in when we're in person, and like that might not seem like a big deal, but it is. And like, what am I going to do for lunch instead of just going down to the kitchen? It's that kind of thing that just, you get into a routine of being online and doing things the way that you do them when things are virtual, and then you have to all of a sudden make the switch back to being in person. And then because they're doing like the staggered reopening, you have to do that like to like a half measure, halfway in between, like half your classes are online and then the rest are in person. So it's just weird, and it feels kind of rushed, and it doesn't feel like it's going to be the greatest experience for just learning in general.
It seems highly likely to me that we actually finish the way that this semester started, in that things do not finish in person, even if it just ends up being kind of like last semester where the last of exams were stopped. I definitely can see that happening. I don't think that's really out there position to take, and I think that's what has people also concerned. It's like, why set people up for that type of just like failure and kind of readjustment again? You know what I mean? When it seems so obvious that that's going to happen, especially without mandating the booster, which Brock did not do. They did not mandate it for all students, just for those in residence. So it's like, yeah, it seems like a recipe for re-closing of campus.
It also like just makes it really hard to plan anything. Like I don't know where my classes are going to be in March. Are they going to be from my bedroom, or are they going to be in a lecture hall? And like, I'm lucky I live in St. Catharines. It's not a big deal for me to sort of change the way that I commute to school, but like there's definitely a lot of students who like planned this semester like living at their parents' house or living somewhere else, who now have to readjust to get back to Brock, to come back to in-person classes. And especially if classes go back online, if there's another spike, which seems likely, then they have to readjust again. It just feels impossible to plan for anything. So I feel like if there was like more structure, it'd just be a lot easier for people in general.
All right. Well, the next kind of thing I want to touch on kind of goes back more to my editorial, which was on the lighter side this week. not going to shy away from it. It was more fun to write because it was a little goofier, just dealing with, outdoor patios in January in Ontario. But it actually kind of even ties back to what we were just talking about. What is how have you guys experienced, the rolling lockdowns and like the phased reopening, just do phased closures of everything back and forth? Have you run into anything kind of like I was talking about with the indoor/outdoor patios, that you feel is just kind of a sign that we're running through the motions and not really doing anything productive? Go ahead, Chad.
Oh yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. No, I was talking to a friend the other day, and one of the most annoying things about this whole in and out of lockdown motion that we've kind of been going through for me was when they designated essential versus non-essential shopping items, and I'd go into Dollarama or Walmart, and I couldn't pick up something, or I couldn't go into Home Depot to get paint. I had to order it, but then, because of that system, I ended up having to go back multiple times for multiple things, and then curbside was a mess. So I'd get the wrong order, and I'd have to be, just more exposed. And I find that a lot of the things that some of these measures have done, they've been a bit counterproductive in that some of them haven't really limited people's exposure. I guess in theory, you can say they might have, because people would, for example, with the curbside thing, they only do curbside pickup, but then if you have to be going back 2, 3, 4 times, rather than doing one round of shopping, for instance, is it really helping much? When there's this whole line outside of the store, is it really helping to limit the exposure? And I think the biggest thing is, especially from a business side, having to deal with closing today and then opening back up in a couple of weeks. Gyms, for example, that have been closed on strip malls, they haven't been able to open. Then they opened again, then now they're closed, but then they'll be able to open again at the end of January. So it's just, some of them they put people in this weird place. And it's changing so much that on one day you might think that this store might be open, or this thing you want to do is appropriate and able to be done, but then the measures say no, but then that might be just for a week or 2 or 3 weeks, and then it's back to normal,
Yeah, I keep Googling stuff. Every time I'm about to go to the grocery store or I need to go out to pick something up, I find myself being are you allowed to go to the dollar store in Ontario right now? Or is the mall open? I think is my most recent and most used Google search of the past couple weeks, just because I don't know what is and isn't allowed. It's not as clear as it was maybe way back at the beginning, when it was just very much everything is shut down except for grocery stores. And I just think that's kind of strange and weird and hard to deal with. There's just not a lot of communication about what's going on. And there's just so many inconsistencies and weird arbitrary things.
It would be nice to see people wherever they are kind of consider things similar. You know what I mean? Consider the threat or the value of doing this versus doing that to be similar. But the fact that you don't see that makes it really disheartening, and makes it, to me, more frustrating that we are doing these things, because it's it just shows you how it's going to be kind of futile regardless, right? Because we're going to have people who traveled from here, who were in contact with people from this other place that doesn't do anything, and then it never really ends, right? Even with a country like Australia that had really stringent measures up until very recently, I don't know, they might even be back under more strict stuff again, but they had taken it very seriously, and it kind of made sense because they were an island nation. They could kind of keep themselves open, and have stick with a COVID zero policy. But since Omicron, they've they've been just overrun and just kind of threw up their hands and gave up. And that type of thing is disheartening to me, because it's like, then why? I get the immediate need of like to protect. Like I understand why we do it, to protect like hospital capacity and whatnot, and there's so much healthcare burnout. But it's like on a larger scale, it's like, why are we doing this? Because this place isn't doing it, and like the U.S. for example is not doing anything, and they're just gonna inevitably bleed over here in however long it takes, right? So it's like the whole thing feels like such a lost cause, and for us to kind of bicker about like closing, restaurants at 10 p.m. or not serving alcohol after 9 or whatever, it just seems so. It can be very exhausting.
Oh yeah, and I just wanted to add to what Holly was saying about the inconsistencies. Even beyond, or I guess more close to home, in just Ontario, even with their planned phased reopening, there's still things that they'll tell you, or in the news releases, or when Premier Ford comes to speak about it, he said, and they'll say things will change, and this isn't like the complete list of things that will open. These guidelines aren't comprehensive, so to speak. So even here in our own province, you're seeing where a lot of the things, some of them are clearly defined, but then some of them aren't also clearly defined, and that can kind of take you into that motion where you're Googling what's open and what's not. And I find that to be the case all the time for me too.
But my last thing to talk about for these reopening articles, something Chad mentioned in his article specifically about some future planning that they're doing by giving municipalities and regional governments some powers to implement their own lockdown measures and restrictions. And I'm just wondering what you guys think of that idea. Is that a part of the solution, or does that only create more confusion? And like, is that actually something that could be like operationalized and actually be impactful and be beneficial?
In theory, no. I do agree that it does help to have certain public health units have the power to be able to say, hey, if cases are very high here, you have a high risk of exposure, then we'll maybe implement different measures than are province-wide. But at the same time, and it's kind of a conflicting feeling I have, where it kind of ties into the confusion and kind of amplifies it a bit more than we've been seeing so far. Because say you have a public health unit like Peel, where I live, if they're saying, hey, this is closed in Peel, or these are the measures we have in Peel, what stops me from going to Toronto or the Niagara region or somewhere else where I can, do the same thing? Does it really truly help the situation? So I don't know how I feel specifically about it, but it is a bit of a conflicting thing for me.
And I think it also requires people to understand local and municipal government, which I think probably Noah could attest to. People really don't. Most people probably couldn't name their own mayor. So to say listen to your own public health unit, you'd get a lot of people who are like, what public health unit? I don't know where to find that information. So I think if that's a thing that's going to happen, there needs to be a whole lot of communication happening, a whole lot of education happening.
Yeah, and I think it kind of has to be reserved for kind of dire local need. You know what I mean? There can't just be a desire for things to be different for the sake of things being different. You know what I mean? To have restaurants open, but you can only sit 4 people at a table or whatever we were doing before in Niagara, versus you go over to Hamilton and you can seat however many you want, right? 30 minutes down the road. It's that type of stuff is silly to me. But what might make sense is like, this school district needs to, go online for X amount of time because they're having so many cases transmitting in person, right? Stuff like that to me makes more sense than like, as I even say in my article, tinkering around the edges type stuff doesn't make sense to do that differently in municipalities, especially around here where municipalities are so close together. But in terms of like bigger stuff and things that are addressing like emergency need and, like health capacity, then it makes sense. Then I do understand that, like closing schools, or even if you have to do like a full closure business. So I don't know if they actually have that power, which is another issue. Like Holly said, you're right. People do not know municipal powers. Even I'm confused if they even have that ability to do that. And I mean, how well does that go over, right? If you do have to end up closing Niagara versus Hamilton's open, how strong is kind of the political capital of municipal government or regional government to be able to like stand firm on something like that?
I completely agree with both of you, Holly and Noah. And I think it's something, if they want to undertake this, they'll need to have a very high level of communication and collaboration. But my issue is I haven't seen where these municipal governments or even the provincial government has been coordinated enough to make a move like this effective, and that's where my concern really lies. Well, this week, both Holly and myself wrote about Bell Let's Talk. We had very differing perspectives. My article was news-oriented and Holly's was opinionated. But just to give you a quick overview of Bell Let's Talk, it's this large campaign. It's, I don't want to say it's corporately motivated, but it's put on by Bell in collaboration with a bunch of universities and organizations and clubs and stuff like that across Canada, really. And it's been going on for over 10 years now. And they kind of focus on raising awareness and destigmatizing mental health and mental health issues. I spoke a bit about what was going on locally at Brock, because like I said, they always collaborate and there's always initiatives done there. But Holly actually spoke about a lot of her grievances around the day and around how we approach a lot of mental health issues and mental health related topics, and just, I guess, how we deal with the topic of mental health at the societal level. When I was reading Holly's article, I agreed with a lot of it, and I just kind of wanted to hear where her head was at in terms of thinking of solutions, and I guess she could highlight a few of the grievances she has. Bell Let's Talk Day, which is...
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I wrote about like my grievances with the day, and like one thing that I wanted to make clear, like in the article and here, is that like I'm never gonna criticize someone for participating in Bell Let's Talk Day. My grievances are not with someone who posts, hashtag Bell Let's Talk, or someone who organizes an event to raise mental health awareness. It is like purely with the corporation Bell, because at its core, Bell Let's Talk Day is advertising. They get a lot of free advertising from this hashtag. The hashtag has their corporate name in it. And one thing, I guess, like the jumping off point for me in this article was that, like, I've noticed that a lot of, like, Bell Let's Talk Day posts will be someone talking about, like, a very, like, deep and personal experience that they have had with their mental health or their mental illness. And then at the end it'll say hashtag Bell Let's Talk, and that just to me has always felt icky, because basically what that is it's a corporation using someone's personal like struggle and strife to advertise. So that was one of my grievances. And then I guess just another one was it's Bell Let's Talk, and I think we're at the point where we need to do more than just destigmatize mental illness and mental health. And also just like the fact that we usually only refer to it as mental health and not mental illness. There is a difference between mental health. Everybody has mental health, but not everybody has mental illness. There's a difference there. And so I think we need to do more than just talk about mental health, more than just destigmatize. I think, my solution for a lot of the grievances I have come at like a societal, systemic level. You can't like talk your psychiatric medication into being less expensive. You can't like talk the healthcare system into being more accessible. You can't talk communities into being more supportive. And I think there's a lot more that we need to do than just talk and say like it's okay to be sad sometimes, because to me that is usually what Bell Let's Talk sounds like, is someone saying it's okay to be sad, and it's less like, hey, it's okay if you need to be hospitalized for your mental health, it's okay to take medication. So yeah, I just think it boils down to, for me at least in the piece, was like the title is like, we need to do more than like hashtag talk about it.
Sure. I definitely agree with Holly, I would say. I'm not one for, well, I'm cynical by nature, so I'm not one to easily fall for kind of goodwill campaigns like this. Again, not to say they haven't donated real money. I mean, money donated is better than not, I suppose, right? But yeah, I certainly agree with Holly, and I'm sure there's even more issues at play with Bell. I've heard of them donating to some pretty questionable mental health organizations in the past. So even then, some of that money's gone to less than quality care. But yeah, I think you're on the money on the social side too, which is more what I want to comment on. Because yeah, just kind of like, I think we're at a point where people generally have an understanding and aren't like weirded out by hearing that somebody has or is struggling with mental illness or whatever it may be. But definitely there's not really any talk about what to do as someone with that helping that person, as someone in their family or kind of their sphere, is how you can be of value to that person to help them. There's not talk about that so much. So it's like we've gotten that, I think that first step of maybe what Bell Let's Talk was more novel in doing in 2010 when it started. I think we've gotten there. But yeah, like even that is one glaring kind of issue, right? Of that could be addressed by something like this. That is certainly not. That it's kind of putting onus on people to come forward about stuff and whatnot, and there's no talk about how to be a helpful friend or sibling or partner or whatever it may be.
Oh yeah, completely. It's interesting because I never really looked into this side of things. I haven't really. I'm not big on social media. I'm not. I don't really use social media too much, but it was interesting to hear Holly talk about them sharing experiences and then adding the hashtag at the end, the Let's Talk. That is definitely a bit messy in my opinion, but I wanted to kind of expound a bit more on what you were saying, in that a lot of it is indeed, you need to take time for self-care and stuff like that. It's not very much focused on people who have to deal with mental illness, and I guess more so supporting people who actually live with a lot of these mental illnesses, since there are quite a variety. But I was wondering, do you think the right move would be, I guess, changing the way how Bell Let's Talk is approached, or moving to do something different altogether, where it's not tied to a corporation, or it's not, or I guess a corporation like Bell, where the advertising is clearly probably making them more money than they're donating.
Yeah, I think like because it's basically what it is. It's like corporatizing mental health, and I don't love that for like a variety of reasons. One is that like, yes, corporations are made up of people, and people themselves can have good intentions, but a corporation exists to make money, and everything that a corporation does has to in some way affect the bottom line positively. That's always a corporation's goal. When you tie it to a corporation, it does become about advertising and making money, and that just feels not great. And also, I just think it's not an effective way to help people, really. Like, you know, you're donating money to a cause, which is like, I don't know, can be good, can be great, but not always. They get a tax write-off for that. So I just think it's not something that is effective. Like, I included in my article a study that it wasn't really effective on a local level in preventing really like sort of tragic things related to mental health. So I think it just doesn't work as it is. It might have made it, you know, in 2010, in like the early 2010s, easier to talk about, you know, if you're having a bad day. It might have made like things like self-care enter like the general vocabulary, but I think we're also at a point in like history and time where self-care and like talking about things doesn't solve every problem. And I also think Bell, Let's Talk, and, you know, most mainstream mental health campaigns are more focused on sort of destigmatizing the idea of mental health and, you know, promoting mental wellness than they are on helping people who have mental illnesses. And I sort of like to make the distinction between mental health and mental illness because, you know, like I said, everybody has mental health. You can sort of self-care, take care of your mental health, you know, doing things like keeping organized and, you know, taking a nice bubble bath or stuff like that. But mental illness, a lot of the time, it's something that has to be treated like any other illness. It's like physical health. Like, you can take care of your physical health, but some people have chronic illnesses that need to be treated medically, and it's the same thing for mental health and mental illness. So I think there's just such an overfocus on mental health that it sort of leaves behind the idea that, you know, as a society, we need to take care of people who have mental illnesses.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with you there, Holly. 100%. And I think maybe one of my larger issues with a lot of these campaigns, not just Bell Let's Talk Day, but a lot of these, I'll put days in quotes. A lot of these days tend to make people feel as if, you know, they just need to focus on this one campaign on this one day rather than it being a revolving thing. And I remember reading, I think, your article on Bell Let's Talk Day in 2021 or 2020 when you were talking about doing more beyond the day. And I definitely feel as though, whether it be mental health related or in terms of specifically dealing with supporting individuals with mental illnesses and destigmatizing that particularly, I feel as though we also should put more of an emphasis on doing these things on a rolling basis, not just, you know, every January or every other month, but, you know, constantly involving these things in our more daily activities or daily campaigns or daily, whether it be our speech or raising awareness or however that looks, but just, I think placing more of an emphasis on the long term, since people are always going to be dealing and trying to, you know, maintain a positive mental health. And then people with mental illnesses don't just have them for a day or a month or a year. So definitely, I feel like long term, we also should look at implementing a lot more campaigns, so to speak, and initiatives to make it beyond just a one-day affair. Make it something that's constant until it's very present in everyone's mind, and that just becomes the societal norm um, to deal with these issues.
I'm not gonna go too much into it because that's actually I've put it down as an idea I'm going to write about in a couple weeks. But I think something else that's important is that we have to understand that we won't ever be able to kind of charity our way out of massive social issues. You can't rely on private charity to fund things like mental health care or pretty much anything else of importance. You do need to understand the role of government in doing something like that, and properly taxing companies like Bell rather than relying on their charitable donations. Things like that. Really thinking about it structurally is important, and that requires kind of getting away from the romanticized view of charity and understanding what needs to be done and how we need to approach things like mental health funding to actually see the changes that we want to see and that are purported by companies like Bell, right? And the things that they're doing to try to protect their position and to maintain their huge dominance and power and control over something like this, right? And to maintain their privileged position rather than highlight what's really the problem here.
So this week for one of my opinion pieces, I wrote about social media and how platforms, I focused on TikTok because it's especially big on TikTok, how they can sort of fling completely just regular, normal people into sort of like their 15 minutes of fame and having huge spotlights super quickly, and how that can sort of result in sort of just the internet as a collective turning on someone really quickly. It's just this cycle of like building someone up on these platforms to sort of tear them down. And it can get like super vicious and like mean and just like nasty and abusive. And sort of what I focused on is that like this kind of vitriol gets thrown at people who really might not have even been interested in getting famous, because like the way that TikTok works is it just throws videos at people. You don't really target an audience, you just post a video, so anyone could go viral at any time thanks to how their algorithm works. So yeah, a lot of these people can just sort of receive a lot of vitriolic, I guess abuse is the right word for it, when they really did not ask for it. So I used a little example of just this dude who lived in New York. He went viral for having a tiny apartment and giving like a tiny apartment tour and being like, I live in this tiny apartment and I'm here because I want to audition for Juilliard. And he was just sharing that experience. And at first people were like, oh my God, this guy is so cool. He's so charming and funny and like goofy. But then as he sort of got, I guess, too cool, people just sort of started to sort of tear him down, and like he didn't get into the school that he wanted to go to. And people were just sort of being quite nasty for like not really a great reason. Yeah, so that's what I focused on, and I think it can be sort of like an extension of celebrity culture. So I guess I just wanted to ask you two, Noah, who's less online than me, and Chad, who's really not online at all. I guess sort of just why do you think people end up treating just other people so poorly on the internet, like more than they would in real life, I think?
Yeah, this is kind of a pretty close to home topic because it kind of ties in, not even kind of, it ties 100% into why I have such a limited social media presence. It's that that I want to say toxic culture that exists there, and how easy it is to just get sucked in, even like you said, inadvertently, and then finding yourself, facing a lot of whether it be depression or anxiety about whether it be fitting in or say you go viral, keeping your following now because now all these eyes are on you. And I think a lot of it is a lot of social media and the issues that surround it come about because it's it's kind of turned our day-to-day lives into entertainment, and so now you have a person who posts on Instagram or they post on Snapchat and then they get a following, or even TikTok. Say they have a cat and they post pictures or videos of their cat. Now they go viral, they have a following. Everyone's getting entertainment from these interactions. So now you are almost forced into this this kind of scenario or relationship where you are now providing this sort of entertainment for these random strangers on the internet, and they believe and they have these expectations of whether it be how frequently you should post or what you should post, and then the negative fallout when the viewers don't get what they want, when you might not have even signed up for that in the first place. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that being so distant and not really having a physical connection to any of these people on the internet for the most part, it's made a lot of terrible people even worse and more justified in being terrible, because there sort of aren't many repercussions. Say you report an account, they get blocked, and then they create a new one, or there isn't really any true ramifications. You just say what you want, you do what you want, and especially when it comes to entertainment, people can get pretty terrible when they don't get what they want, or they don't think an entertainer or a personality lives up to their expectations or is meeting their expectations. And then, like you said, they can easily go from building you up to tearing you back down, and you're just thrown on this loop that you didn't even want to enter or know you were entering, but because of an algorithm, that's just where you are. And it has real world impact and lasting impact on people, because as much as the internet allows you to feel disconnected and dehumanize a lot of people and think of them as just these online personalities, these are real individuals with real lives and real issues and real struggles. And something as seemingly arbitrary as how their viewership on TikTok treats them can have serious ramifications as it relates to their mental health or their wellness and even their idea of their self-worth.
I think also, like everything you said, like, totally agree with it. There's also, like, this, like, aspect of social media that's very, very weird, where I don't know, I think, like, in recent years, there's this sort of, like, idea that everyone has to sort of act like an influencer, especially with, like, things like TikTok, because, you had, like, in the past, like, celebrities were the people that, like, you built up, and then, the collective shifts and they decide that they don't like this person anymore. And that was, like, a very bad and terrible thing, and it hurt a lot of people. But at least, like, then they were, like, celebrities. They had, teams of people. They had a lot of resources. And then, with influencers, most influencers started doing it on purpose. But, like, with stuff like TikTok, or even just, like, you have a tweet that goes viral, it feels like if you're getting enough attention on the internet, people will just treat you like a celebrity, and sort of, think that the things that they are saying about you, you'll never see. They'll think that it's just, like, a haha funny joke, when really, like, most of the people that we're interacting with on the internet now are just regular people. Like, most people on TikTok are, like, just some guy, just some person who happened to upload a video, and they're not wildly wealthy or powerful or influential. They're just people. And that's, I think, something that I was trying to get at with the article, is that, like, the idea of, like, the new celebrity culture where, like, anyone can be famous and get all that attention and have that 15 minutes of fame makes it really hard to deal with, like, being on the internet, because everyone's treating you like you have this power that you don't, just because you have, like, a small following.
Yeah, I think there's a few things at play here. A few really bad things that have just kind of spun out of control. The first is definitely oversharing. not to blame people that have been targeted by mobs of insane people who try to ruin their lives, but like, yeah, I definitely think there's value in like what Chad said. Even myself, as I'm shifting away from social media use at all, uh, there's a reason to that. I just the risk you put yourself at is just not worth the serotonin boost, the temporary kind of feel good moments of people liking things and whatnot. It's not worth it to make yourself that vulnerable to unwarranted and unfounded and unfair and the dogpiling. So yeah, I think that's important to consider. That especially with a platform like TikTok, you are at any point, able to be launched into people's view, right? The view of millions of people potentially, and you don't know their intentions. You don't know even their mental health, frankly. And I think part of this is fueled a little bit by that. People not have necessarily in the greatest headspaces and kind of just taking things out on people that they feel they can control. And then there's also the issue of it's not necessarily fake news, but like that same type of idea, and that we just but kind of in the inverse. Whereas now, you see people are naturally suspicious of like major news companies and corporations and whatnot. But then inversely, I think that people are instantly trusting the people that they feel are just kind of small time influencers and content creators, especially on a platform like TikTok, right? Just because someone puts in the effort to say that, if you have these symptoms, you definitely have, this disease or something, or you need to buy their special supplement or whatever they're trying to sell to you, right? Just because they put in that effort to make that video, I think more people are inclined to believe that they are an expert or they have good intentions. I don't really understand why, but I think that's something that is somewhat true. So I think that has a little bit to do with it. Just the instant kind of belief in what people see online, especially on a platform like TikTok, that is making that a lot worse. But I'm going to kind of drop a point here, and I'm curious of your guys' response to it, because I don't think that there's any point where someone deserves to be taken down in terms of like being sought out and researched and investigated, and not like investigation can be like a formal term. I don't mean in the legal system. I mean by like the hordes of people, just the mob. I don't think that's ever warranted. People to investigate their private lives and get them fired from their place of work or whatever because of, I don't think that's ever warranted. Any cases I've seen that's come up, I think that's so over the line, especially when we're talking about average people. I'm not necessarily talking about celebrity, but like for people to call people's place of work or tag them online and try to get people fired for oftentimes nothing, but like, I don't know. I don't think that's the role of the angry online mob. I don't think it should be, even though it is in some way. But Holly, go ahead. I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I think I draw a line at like a certain point where I think it's, if you are like watching someone on TikTok and you happen to scroll far back enough and you see that they said something just terrible or like bigoted, or even just that you like personally disagree with, I think it's fine to sort of say like, hey, this person said something awful, I don't want to watch them anymore, and I think other people who are watching this person should maybe know that this is how this person feels about this topic, and then, therefore it's your decision whether or not you want to continue giving this person an audience, because I think at the end of the day, no one's entitled to an audience if they do something that, warrants people just taking their viewership elsewhere. I think that's different than if you are seeking out a reason to hate this person, if you're sort of seeking out a reason to just all of a sudden decide that you don't like them and then using that energy to sort of send them just terrible things. I think that's where I draw the line on that kind of stuff, if that makes sense.
What I'm getting at is like the guy that you're talking about, like just like TikTok guy who just posts a video or whatever and it gets huge, and it's like people, there are, I know it's still technically anecdotal, but like there are like numerous cases where those people who are not influencers, who didn't ask for an audience, or even if they did, it's like that's not their job, right? Like they have full-time work. This is just like a pastime to use social media as it was intended to be used for. And then people like tagging their employer online to try to get them fired, or like contacting their family, or like releasing their address and things like that stuff to me is just absolutely absurd. And it's happening like increasingly, I feel like. That to me seems so insanely wrong. You know what I mean? Like that just seems so offline, even if that person wants an audience. Yeah, I agree. No one is entitled to an audience, of course. But certainly maybe it's not true, but I feel that people should be entitled to their personal privacy and feeling of safety. You know what I mean? And like even they should be, I don't know if entitled to making a livelihood outside of entertainment, but like I don't think that is justifiable. I don't know. It's hard to put to words, but I think I made the point clearer there, the distinction. Because I agree with Holly, I agree with you on that first part, but I think there's a bigger thing this is more and more often kind of snowballing and rolling into, which is troubling.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you both. I definitely know what you mean. No, I've seen it quite a few times as well. I also do take issue with individuals making their difference in opinion or their difference in viewpoint um, fuel and drive them to do things like contacting people's family and sending them hateful things and trying to get them fired. I agree, and I kind of I assume or yeah I assume that where Holly was kind of thinking too is with a few people they'll post certain negative things and I feel like people have a right to report stuff like that and broadcast that this is malicious content so to speak and leave it there and I guess also if they're doing things that are just generally just absolutely terrible things, then of course it can be bigger than that. But I think there's this blurred line where people sometimes feel as if just a simple difference in viewpoint, even if you think, the way how you feel about a certain topic is right, or there's like a clear wrong. I think a lot of what I see, at least personally on social media, is this culture where just because the viewpoint is different, then it's almost like you feel justified to go tear down this person's personal life and get them fired when it might not be something I agree with, and it might be something that, based on their viewpoint, I would never associate with them at all, and I feel as if they're terrible people. But if it is just an opinion or something you said or a stance you hold that I just don't agree with, unless you're going out and harming people per se, then I'm more along the lines of just filtering out that content. I don't have to see it, but definitely not taking it to any extreme where you're targeting the person and becoming a menace to their life and trying to ruin their life. I feel like that takes things a little bit too far. And I think the cases where that may be justified are so few and far between that in general it's just not an okay thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think like one thing is like, again, like to draw a line is like when you say something on social media, you are saying that on a public platform and a public forum, and I guess you do kind of have to understand that people can see that people can send that to people. Like there's like I guess I'll just say, like, as a woman who's on the internet, there's a thing that will happen where like some guy usually will send a terrible, disgusting message to a woman, and then that woman will then find him on Facebook and then send that message that they sent to her to his mom. And I think that if you're doing something like that on like a public platform, I think you have to be okay with the reality that your mom might see it, and that like your employer might see it. I don't think that it's productive or good, or morally justifiable to see someone saying something that you disagree with on the internet, and, you know, go out and find their place of work and call their boss and demand that they be fired, or find their address, or like target their families. But I do think there's an element of like, if you say something disgusting on a public platform, that platform is public, and people can take that and show that to people that you know, if that makes sense. Like, I know that like I'm on Twitter a lot. There are a lot of people who've gotten very mad at me for certain things that I have said. But at the end of the day, if someone took those things that I said and sent them to my parents, I wouldn't be upset, because I know that those are things that I like stand by and aren't vile and disgusting. So I think there's just that element of like, this is a public platform. If you don't want your mom to see what you're tweeting, have a private account and don't be gross.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly truth to that. I mean, you run the risk, of course, of anyone seeing anything you post publicly. Absolutely. Just some of it feels like people are like an online just mob of cultures, like taking it on themselves to be like judge, jury, and executioner, and it just feels wrong in a lot of instances, I think, regardless of the obscenity of people's views. One thing, I mean, obviously it's different threats, of course, like you mentioned. Absolutely. Women face a lot of threats online. And I mean, those are, in that instance, people are breaking the law, right? They should be reported. And I understand that even when it is reported to law enforcement, a lot of times it's not taken seriously. I definitely understand that and know that is the case. But mob justice to me feels wrong. And I don't know. It just rubs me the wrong way. Even if it might make sense in the moment, it's just, I don't know. There's got to be a better way to deal with stuff like this, is my thinking.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think like for me, it's like mob justice versus like public opinion. Mob justice, you know, doesn't super work, especially when like I guess like I was saying in my article, when it's someone who's like just recording themselves, just hanging out, not doing anything, you know, and then all of a sudden a mob decides that the right and just thing to do is to like cancel this person for whatever sort of perceived wrongdoing that they have done. I guess in the case of the guy that I wrote about, the perceived wrongdoing was that he did not get into Juilliard, and then people commented on Juilliard's Instagram posts being like, why didn't you let this guy in? And, you know, that wasn't his fault, and I don't think that that person deserved the treatment that they got for that. So I think especially the idea of, like, mob justice, especially when it is, I guess the person on the receiving end of it is quite undeserving. I think that's definitely a problem.
That does it for another episode of The Latest. Thank you, Holly and Chad, both of you, for your time today and for joining me to talk about these interesting and conversations starting and churning articles. They were all great. as were the others we didn't talk about, which you can find on our website at www.brockpress.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, where we post our stories and, occasionally some other things come up. You never know. On top of following us on social media, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and Radio Public. Just be sure to look up the latest The Brock Press Podcast, and you should find us with no issues. You can also find the podcast on our YouTube channel and on our website. With all that said, thanks again, and we will see you next time for another episode.